When Simon Sinek speaks, it isn't just about business. It's about life, relationships, and the way we choose to show up in the world. He reminds us that leadership is not a title, it's a behavior. And the very first step to becoming a leader worth following is asking yourself a simple yet profound question. Why? Why do you wake up every morning? Why does your work matter? Why should anyone trust you to guide them? Most of us search for strategies, quick fixes, shortcuts. But what truly inspires people is not what you do, or even how you do it. It's the deep resonance of why you do it. And when you discover your why, it doesn't just change the way others see you, it changes the way you see yourself. But here's the paradox. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to say, I don't know, but let's find out together. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the birthplace of trust. Teams don't follow perfect leaders, they follow leaders who are human enough to admit imperfection, but brave enough to move forward anyway. Sinek calls us to think in terms of the infinite game. In life and in business, there is no finish line. The goal isn't to win. It's to keep playing, to keep evolving, to keep serving. And when we stop measuring ourselves against others, and instead measure ourselves against the impact we create, we stop chasing trophies and start building legacies. At the heart of this is trust. Trust isn't built in grand gestures. It is built in the everyday moments when we show up consistently, when we listen more than we speak, when we choose honesty even when it's uncomfortable. A leader without trust is a manager. A leader with trust becomes a source of courage, and that courage is what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. The courage to break old patterns, to take risks that matter, to prioritize meaning over comfort. Because comfort never created growth, and growth never came without courage. In the end, the leaders we remember, the ones who leave us speechless, are not the ones who sought power, but the ones who empowered others. Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. That is how legacies are written, not in titles, not in victories, but in lives touched. So, the next time you listen to Simon Sinek, don't just hear his words, feel the challenge in them. He's not giving advice for business, he's offering a blueprint for humanity. And if you're willing to live it, you may just find that your leadership leaves the world a little less speechless and a little more inspired. Start with why, leave with purpose, because everything else becomes noise when the core is missing. Too often, people chase after outcomes. They collect achievements. They climb ladders without asking if the ladder is leaning against the right wall. The question of why is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront truth. Why do we get up in the morning? Why do we pour our time, our energy, our years into what we do? If the answer is only survival, if the answer is only money or recognition, then the foundation cracks the moment challenges arrive. People lose motivation not because the work is too hard, but because the reason isn't strong enough to hold them when it gets hard. Leaders who inspire understand this. They don't use fear to push people. They don't manipulate with deadlines, threats, or the dangling of reward. Fear may spark action, but it does not sustain commitment. Manipulation may generate results, but it does not create loyalty. People are wired to follow meaning, to connect to something larger than themselves, to give their energy to a purpose that feels alive. When a leader communicates not just what needs to be done, but why it matters, they ignite a fire that doesn't burn out when obstacles come. Purpose is magnetic. It attracts those who believe what you believe, it filters out those who don't resonate, and it gives clarity when the path becomes uncertain. In the absence of purpose, people drift. In the presence of purpose, people endure. This is why movements are born, why communities stay strong, and why organizations thrive even through crisis. The why is the anchor, the compass, and the energy source. Without it, success feels empty. With it, even struggle feels meaningful. But living with purpose is not just for leaders. It is for anyone who wants their life to carry weight beyond existence. Purpose doesn't always come in dramatic form. It can be as quiet as raising a child with love, as steady as showing up for a team, as passionate as creating something that speaks to others. What matters is not the scale, but the alignment. When your actions reflect your why, there is integrity between what you believe and how you live. That alignment gives peace and it gives power. The courage to ask why is also the courage to say no to distractions, to opportunities that look shiny but don't serve the mission, to shortcuts that promise ease but cost integrity. Leaders who inspire are not necessarily the ones with the loudest voices, but the ones with the clearest sense of purpose. And that clarity is contagious. People sense it, they trust it, and they want to be part of it. So when you strip away the noise, the competition, the external pressures, what remains is this. If you want to inspire, if you want to lead, if you want to live fully, begin with why. Because purpose is not just an idea, it is the fuel that makes everything else possible. The power of vulnerability lies in the courage to be seen as we are, not as we think we should be. Strength is not the mask we wear to impress others, nor the illusion of control we cling to in moments of uncertainty. Real strength comes from the willingness to admit what we don't know, to open ourselves to learning, and to invite others into the process with us. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is the raw material of trust, intimacy, and authentic connection. When we strip away the armor of perfection, we make room for people to meet us where we truly are. In leadership, this truth is even more profound. Leaders often believe their role demands certainty, that admitting doubt undermines authority. Yet it is the opposite. A leader who pretends to know everything isolates themselves, distances their team, and suffocates creativity. But a leader who says, "I don't have the answer, but together we can find one," communicates faith in the collective, and that faith inspires collaboration. Vulnerability creates space for others to step forward, to contribute their insights, to feel valued. It turns hierarchy into partnership. Vulnerability also humanizes us. People do not connect to perfection, they connect to humanity. When someone reveals their struggles, their fears, or their mistakes, they give others permission to do the same. This shared honesty builds bonds that no facade of strength could ever achieve. In families, in friendships, in organizations, vulnerability is the bridge that closes distance. It is the language that tells others, you are not alone, and in that space of shared imperfection, trust grows roots. But vulnerability requires courage because it risks rejection. To admit what we don't know, to reveal what hurts, to confess failure. These acts expose us to judgment. Yet the alternative is far costlier. Hiding behind certainty breeds pressure and isolation. Pretending to be invulnerable eventually cracks under the weight of reality. Those who dare to embrace vulnerability discover that most people don't reject them for it. Instead, they feel closer, more loyal, more connected. The very thing we fear showing is often what others most need to see. This truth extends beyond leadership into every corner of life. Relationships thrive not because partners hide their flaws, but because they share them and learn to navigate them together. Creativity flourishes not because people play it safe, but because they risk failure and share unpolished ideas. Growth happens not because we cling to pride, but because we humble ourselves enough to admit we don't have it all figured out. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, intimacy, and resilience. Strength, then, is not the absence of fear or weakness, but the courage to embrace them openly. To say, I don't know, is to create a doorway to discovery. To say, I was wrong, is to create a foundation for trust. To say, this is hard, is to create space for compassion. The power of vulnerability is that it transforms relationships, teams, and lives by replacing the illusion of control with the authenticity of connection. Infinite game thinking begins with understanding that life, business, and leadership are not contests with fixed rules and clear endpoints. There is no final whistle, no permanent victory. no moment when we can declare that we have won forever. True leadership is not about defeating others, but about sustaining momentum, nurturing vision, and cultivating resilience to stay in the game no matter how the conditions shift. The finite mindset asks, how do I win? The infinite mindset asks, how do I endure, adapt, and serve something greater than myself? When leaders obsess over winning, they measure themselves only by short-term results, numbers, titles, or comparisons with competitors. But winning is fragile. The moment someone else surpasses you, the victory evaporates. The leader who plays the finite game is always chasing, always defending, always afraid of losing ground. In contrast, the leader who embraces the infinite game focuses on legacy, on purpose, on creating systems that outlast them. Their question is not, how can I beat the others, but how can I keep contributing, how can I keep building, how can I keep the vision alive? Resilience becomes the essential currency of the infinite game. Setbacks are not signs of failure, but part of the journey. A resilient leader does not measure themselves by the stumble, but by the ability to rise again, to learn, and to continue. They understand that progress is not linear, that growth demands patience, and that perseverance matters more than applause. This resilience is contagious. Teams that follow infinite-minded leaders discover strength in persistence, finding motivation not in short-term rewards but in the shared belief that what they are doing has enduring meaning. Vision also transforms in the infinite game. It is not about predicting every turn of the road, but about setting a direction so compelling that people are willing to follow through uncertainty. Vision acts as a lighthouse, reminding people why they began, even when storms obscure the path. Leaders who play with vision create cultures where adaptability is possible because everyone understands the deeper purpose guiding them. They don't cling rigidly to plans, they adapt while remaining anchored to the mission. The infinite game also reshapes relationships. Instead of seeing competitors as enemies to destroy, infinite leaders recognize them as players who push them to evolve. Instead of seeing teams as tools for output, they see them as partners in an ongoing journey. Collaboration, trust, and shared purpose take precedence over ego. In the infinite mindset, people matter more than trophies because people are the ones who carry the vision forward. At its heart, infinite game thinking demands humility. It reminds us that we are stewards, not owners, of the missions we lead. We will not see the full fruits of our labor, but we plant seeds anyway, knowing others will continue the work. Leadership in this frame becomes less about personal victory and more about collective endurance. True leadership is not a race to the finish line. It is the commitment to keep playing, to keep serving, and to keep believing that the greatest impact is not in winning, but in ensuring the game goes on. Trust is the invisible currency that sustains leadership, the foundation upon which everything else rests. Authority may grant a title, but it cannot guarantee loyalty. Power may enforce obedience, but it cannot inspire commitment. Success that endures is never built on control. It is built on relationships rooted in trust. When people trust a leader, they do not follow out of fear, they follow out of belief. They do not give the minimum required. They offer their best willingly because they know they are valued, respected, and seen. Trust is earned in the small, consistent moments. It is not built by grand speeches or single acts of charisma, but through reliability, honesty, and integrity over time. When leaders keep their promises, when they admit mistakes instead of hiding them, when they listen without judgment, they send a message that people can rely on them. This reliability becomes the foundation of psychological safety, a state where individuals feel free to speak, create, and challenge without fear of punishment. In such an environment, innovation thrives and relationships deepen. The absence of trust, however, creates a fragile culture. Teams begin to hide their weaknesses, avoid risks, and withhold ideas because they fear judgment. Leaders who rely solely on authority may achieve compliance, but never genuine engagement. Without trust, people show up with guarded hearts and half their energy, waiting for the moment they can leave or disengage. Trust, then, is not optional, it is essential. Without it, authority is hollow. With it, authority becomes unnecessary because people follow willingly rather than reluctantly. But building trust requires vulnerability and courage. A leader who admits, "I don't know, but I will find out," inspires more trust than one who pretends to have all the answers. A leader who says, "I made a mistake, and here is how I will fix it," gains respect rather than losing it. Trust is not about perfection, it is about honesty. It is about showing up with integrity even when it is inconvenient. Trust also requires empathy. To lead with trust is to genuinely care about the people you serve, to prioritize their growth, to stand by them when challenges arise. When people sense that their leader sees them not as tools but as human beings with dreams and struggles, their loyalty deepens. Trust is strengthened when people feel understood. It is broken when they feel used. In the end, leadership is not measured by how many follow orders, but by how many trust the person giving them. Trust transforms authority into influence, and influence into impact. The leaders we remember are not those who held the most power, but those who earned the most trust. They created spaces where people could thrive, where ideas could flourish, where collaboration replaced competition. That is why trust is the true currency of leadership, because without it, success is temporary, but with it, success can last beyond the leader themselves. Courage over comfort is the choice that defines progress. Leaders who make a lasting impact are not the ones who cling to the familiar, but the ones who dare to step into the unknown, challenge assumptions, and question traditions that no longer serve. Comfort offers safety, predictability, and control, but it also breeds stagnation. Courage, on the other hand, invites uncertainty and risk, yet it is the only path to growth. Every breakthrough in history, every movement that changed the course of society, began because someone chose courage instead of comfort. For leaders, this choice is especially critical. The familiar systems may feel secure, but they are often barriers to evolution. Teams look to leaders not just for direction, but for permission to stretch beyond limits. When a leader shows courage by making a hard decision, by disrupting the status quo, by taking responsibility for an unpopular but necessary change, they send a signal that growth matters more than approval. That signal gives others the strength to follow. Without courage at the top, fear trickles down. With courage, conviction ripples outward. Choosing courage does not mean reckless risk-taking. It means making decisions guided by purpose, even when those decisions are uncomfortable. It may look like admitting a failing strategy and pivoting when pride wants to persist. It may look like standing up for values when compromise seems easier. It may look like advocating for people who have no voice, even if it costs popularity. True courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to act despite it. Comfort can be seductive. It whispers that staying the same is safer, that blending in avoids conflict, that silence will shield us from judgment. But leaders who stay in comfort zones eventually lose relevance. Markets shift, cultures evolve, challenges emerge. Without courage, leaders react too late or resist too long. Progress slips through their hands because they chose ease over growth. History does not remember those who avoided discomfort. It remembers those who transformed it into possibility. Courage also requires resilience. Challenging the familiar will always bring resistance. People are attached to what they know, even when it no longer works. Leaders must be prepared to face criticism, doubt, and setbacks. The courage to keep going when the path is lonely is what separates visionaries from caretakers of the status quo. And over time, the discomfort that once felt unbearable becomes the new normal, until the cycle repeats again with new challenges. At a personal level, Courage over comfort is a universal truth. Each time we choose courage, whether to speak up in a meeting, to start a venture, to admit a difficult truth, we expand the boundaries of what is possible for ourselves. Leaders who live this principle show others that fear does not define the limit of action. Their example proves that progress is not born from waiting until we feel ready, but from daring while we are still afraid. In the end, leadership is not about keeping everyone comfortable. It is about guiding them toward growth, even when growth feels uncertain and hard. Courage over comfort is the choice that keeps the future alive, because without courage there is only repetition, but with courage there is transformation. Legacy through service is the essence of leadership that endures beyond titles, accolades, or moments of recognition. Leadership has never been about standing at the top of the hierarchy and issuing commands. It is about carrying the weight of responsibility for the people who look to you for guidance. To serve is not to diminish authority. It is to redefine it. The leader who sees their role as service understands that influence is not measured by how many obey, but by how many grow under their care. True service demands humility. It requires setting aside ego and recognizing that leadership is not about personal glory, but about creating the conditions for others to thrive. A leader's greatest measure is not how brightly they shine, but how they light the path for those around them. When people feel seen, valued, and supported, they give not because they are forced to, but because they want to. Service inspires a loyalty that authority alone can never command. Taking care of those in your charge means creating safety, both emotional and practical. It is about ensuring that people are not crushed by fear of failure, that they know mistakes are opportunities to learn rather than grounds for punishment. It is about protecting your team when external pressures mount, absorbing blame when things go wrong, and sharing credit when they go right. Service demands sacrifice, the willingness to put the needs of others ahead of your own comfort or recognition. That sacrifice becomes the foundation of trust. A legacy is not built in moments of easy leadership, but in the hard choices. When leaders prioritize service over self-interest, they leave behind a culture where people look after one another, where collaboration replaces competition, and where purpose drives performance. Such a culture does not fade when the leader steps away. It continues, sustained by the values they modeled. That is the true test of leadership, whether the impact lasts beyond the leader's presence. Service also extends beyond organizations into communities and societies. Leaders who act with service understand that their influence reaches further than the walls of their office. They create opportunities, protect dignity, and give voice to those who are unheard. The ripple effects of service shape not just immediate teams, but generations that follow. A life of service becomes a legacy of hope, resilience, and possibility, but service is not passive. It is not about pleasing everyone or avoiding hard truths. It is about doing what is right for the growth and well-being of others, even when it requires difficult conversations or unpopular decisions. Service is active stewardship, a daily choice to put the mission and the people above personal gain. And in that choice, leaders model a way of being that others are inspired to emulate. In the end, titles fade, power shifts, achievements are forgotten. What remains is how people felt under your leadership. Did they feel protected, empowered, valued? Did they grow because you made space for them too? Legacy through service is the mark of leaders who understood that to lead is not to stand above, but to stand beside, lifting others higher than they could rise alone.